Chapter 9 The Best Presents. Well, 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 what have we got here? Mandy turned to see Mrs. McFarlane standing behind her. She was gazing up into the tree. A kitten, Mandy told her. Stuck. Better call the fire department, Mrs. McFarlane said. You'll never get him down on your own. I think we should try first, Dr. Emily said. She went around the back to get a ladder, but when she put it up against the tree, it only reached halfway. By now, other people from the village had arrived. Walter Pickard had been on his way to the shop. He stood gazing up into the tree, shaking his head. My, he said, that is a long way up. Then Grandpa arrived on his bike. What's going on, Emily? He asked. When she told him, he burst out laughing. Mandy Hope, he said, what will you do next? It's not funny, Grandpa, Mandy said, close to tears. Grandpa stood with his chin in his hand. Maybe you could persuade him to climb down. Mandy shook her head. He's too scared. Mandy's teacher, Mrs. Todd, drove up in her car. She got out to see what all the commotion was about. Well, Mandy, she said, when Dr. Emily explained what was happening, this is going to be something to put in your journal. Mandy was growing more and more anxious. Everyone was talking about Clown, but no one was doing anything. I think we had better get the fire department, Dr. Emily said at last. I'll explain to them on the phone. She disappeared indoors. Mandy stood gazing up at Clown. He was crouched on a fragile branch, looking very frightened. She didn't think she could bear it if he had a sudden movement and fell off. Please stay still, Clown, she whispered. We'll get you down. I know we will. James was crouched down, his face buried in Blackie's neck. It seemed he couldn't bear to look either. It wasn't long before the fire engine came roaring along the village street toward them. It pulled up outside Animal Ark. 6 burly firefighters piled out. All right, the chief said. Where's the kitten? Mandy pointed. Up there, she said, anxiously. He's very scared. Please, can you get him down? The chief tipped his helmet back on his head. He gazed upward. Then he made a salute. Don't you worry, young lady, he said. We'll do our best. The firefighters got their long ladder from the top of the engine. With a screech and a clang, they put it up against the tree. Higher and higher it went until it almost reached the branch where Clown was crouched. One of the firefighters began to climb. When he got to the top, he stretched out his arms. Mandy held her breath. The firefighter's fingers were inches away from Clown. The kitten gave a small meow and moved backward. By now, quite a crowd had gathered. Everyone gave a gasp. Then the firefighter shook his head and began to climb back down. I'm sorry, he said when he reached the bottom. That branch is too fragile to hold my weight. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get him. Everyone began making talk among themselves. We'll have to call for a longer ladder, the chief was saying. Mandy stared up at Clown. It could be a long time before another ladder arrived. She had to do something. If the branch wouldn't hold the firefighter's weight, maybe it would hold hers. Mandy looked at James and held her finger to her lips. His mouth fell open when he saw what Mandy intended to do. James began to shake his head. Mandy, no, he hissed. Blackie lay down and hid his face in his paws. But Mandy had made up her mind. She was going to rescue Clown herself. She began to climb up the ladder, up and up until she felt she might almost reach the sky. She didn't dare look down. Right at the top, she stepped carefully onto Clown's branch. Now, don't move, she told him sternly. Stay where you are and I can reach you. Mandy clung on tight. Her heart was thudding like a drum. She crawled slowly along the branch toward the kitten. Then she stretched out her hand and scooped him up. The kitten clung to her hand, glad to be rescued at last. Below, Mandy heard Dr. Emily shout, Mandy, what are you doing? She had been talking to Grandpa with her back to the ladder and had only just noticed what Mandy was up to. But Mandy was already on her way down. When she reached the bottom, everyone cheered. Dr. Emily grabbed her arm. Mandy, you shouldn't have done that. You might have fallen. She looked angry. Mandy hung her head. Now that she was back down, she realized just how dangerous her climb had been. "I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't leave poor little Clown up there any longer." Dr. Emily put her arm around Mandy and gave her a hug. "Don't you ever do anything like that again," she said. Soon Clown was tucked safely back in with the other kittens. Mandy thanked the firefighters. She watched as the fire engine roared off down the main street. It wasn't every day that there was an exciting rescue in the sleepy village. When the kitten basket was safely in the back of the car, they set off for the Westmore house. "You'd better leave Blackie in the car," Dr. Emily told James when they arrived at Westmore House. "He'll only cause havoc. We've had enough trouble for one day." "Okay." James rolled down the window a little so that Blackie had some fresh air. One of Della's helpers opened the door. Come in," he said. "Everyone's waiting." Mandy felt excited as they marched along the hall toward the big living room at the end. She and James carried the basket between them. With 6 chubby kittens inside, it was quite heavy. In the living room, everyone stopped talking and turned to look at them. One man went to turn off the television. "Hurrah!" someone called. "They're here!" Mandy smiled and nodded. Della rose from a chair by the fire and came over. "We've all been so excited," she said. She peered into the basket, then drew in her breath. "Oh, they're so sweet! Look, everyone!" Mandy put down the basket. She opened the door a little and took out one of the kittens. "This is Sam." She took him over and gave him to a lady sitting by the window. Then she took out another one. "This is Carrots," she announced. Everyone smiled and laughed. "What a good name," one of the men called. He held out his arms. "Can I hold him?" James took Carrots and placed him in the old man's arms. "I've got a cat too," James whispered. "What's his name?" the old gentleman asked. "Benji," said James. "He's big and fluffy. I've got a puppy as well. His name's Blackie." "I used to have a dog," the old man told him, "but a cat will do just as well." He smiled down at Carrots. The kitten was purring and rubbing his face against the old man's woolly cardigan. "This is Pepper." Mandy bent down to take the black kitten from the basket. Pepper wriggled and jumped out of her arms. She scampered over to Mrs. Brown and began to climb up the leg of her stool. Della went to rescue her. She put her on Mrs. Brown's lap. Pepper curled up and began to purr gently. The old lady's face lit up as she stroked the kitten's soft fur. "Thank you, Mandy," she said. "Pepper is going to be my favorite." "And this is Clown." Mandy lifted the kitten out. Clown seemed no different after his ordeal in the tree. "He's really bad," Mandy said. She looked around. "Who wants him?" A dozen arms were outstretched. "Give him to Tom," Della suggested. Mandy took the kitten over to Tom. Tom was sitting with his back to everyone. Mandy tapped him gently on the shoulder. "Would you like to hold this one?" she said softly. Tom mumbled something that Mandy could not hear. "Please," she said. "You'll feel much better. He'll make you laugh, honestly." The old man turned slowly. The frown fell from his face when he saw the pretty kitten. Mandy put Clown gently into Tom's lap. Tom turned away again and softly stroked Clown's head. Mandy could see that Clown was going to be Tom's best friend. She smiled to herself and went back to the basket. There were 2 kittens left. "This is Pumpkin," she said, taking her out. Pumpkin was the laziest of all the kittens. She opened one sleepy eye and yawned. "I'll have her," said Dora. Dr. Emily took Pumpkin over. The kitten took one look at Dora, then curled around on her lap and fell fast asleep. Dora smiled. She lay back in her chair and closed her eyes, too. "Now," Mandy took George out. She went over to the old man who didn't like cats. "He's named after you, George," she said, gazing at the old man. The old man shook his head and turned away. "Smells," he said. "No, he doesn't," Mandy said. "He's clean and beautiful. Look at him." The old man looked at Mandy. Then he looked at the kitten. He shrugged his shoulders. "If no one else wants him." "I do," a voice came from the corner. "I'll have the little fellow." George snatched the kitten from Mandy's arms. "No, you won't," he said. "He's mine." "Oh, dear," Dr. Emily said. "I hope they're not going to fight over them." Della laughed. "I'm sure they'll sort it out." She turned to Mandy and James. They're beautiful. Thank you so much, you two. Mandy took her journal from her pocket. She gave it to Della. This is for you, she said shyly. Della opened the journal. As well as writing all about them, Mandy had drawn a little picture of each of the cats. Della drew in her breath. It's lovely, Mandy. She took the journal across to Mrs. Brown. Look at this. Soon the journal was being passed around. There were oohs and ahs from everyone. Did you have a nice party? Mandy asked Mrs. Brown. Yes, thank you, dear. It was lovely, the old lady told her. Did you get lots of presents? Quite a few, Mrs. Brown said. But these kittens are the best present of all. Dr. Emily looked at her watch. I'm afraid we've got to go. I've got some calls to make. We'll come up tomorrow and help feed them, Mandy said as they made their way to the front door. That would be very nice, Mandy, Della said. Although, I've got a feeling there are going to be plenty of willing hands to look after our new family. You've made a lot of people very happy. No, Mandy said. It's the kittens who are going to make them happy. On the way home, James sat in the back seat with Blackie. Do you think they'd like a therapy puppy, too? He joked, struggling to stop the puppy from chewing the seatbelt. Dr. Emily chuckled. Not one like Blackie, I don't think. They would never cope.